everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. I will just start sharing the slides. So today we're going to talk about a few things as it relates to electricity sector hiring and retaining international talent, immigrants. And why are we having this conversation? Canada is, together with other developed and developing countries, we are currently in a competition to attract people with a diverse set of skills. And electricity being the primary industry, we do receive a number of newcomers, immigrants, who are skilled in this sector. And we will talk about a little bit about Welcoming Newcomers, which is a program organized and administered by EHRC that is funded by ESDC. We will talk about immigrant categories, and I'll have a brief explanation on what is an immigrant, what's a newcomer, what's temporary worker, I'll talk about this category just in the sense that we understand what the terms are, because sometimes we use them interchangeably. We will also talk about the immigrant serving agencies that are traditionally federally and provincially funded, who are supporting immigrants, but as well as employers. So you may know about immigrant serving agencies in terms of like supporting the newcomers, but a lot of them that have employment programs are also supporting the employers. And then my co-facilitator and colleague Richard Jenkins will take over to provide an overview of the report, Newcomer Impact Study. And after that, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So, just go, okay. So why are we still talking, or why are we talking about immigrants, and what's the importance of attracting immigrants, and why is it a competition? As we know, Canada, like a lot of developed countries, we as a country have a low birth rate and a rapidly growing and aging sector of people in their later stages of life. And our economy, there's a need to diversify the economy. There's a need to increase the amount of contribution to different programs, as well as trying to diversify our economy that is that includes for us electricity sector. So in the light of, traditionally, it's been like newcomers have had a bit of a hard time integrating the workplace, often for understanding how Canadian workplace works, for employers understanding where and how immigrants, understanding the experience and the education system. And we often hear about issues about credentials, like, their credentials are not worth in Canada, which is partially true, but also how do we kind of create that matching system between the newcomers and the employers that traditionally has been a bit of a problem. So in Electricity Human Resources, we have a program called Welcoming Newcomers Program, where we provide a financial incentive of up to $10,000 to make up for about 50% of the salary, to incentivize employers to give newcomers an opportunity to start working in the electricity sector. And so this money is considered whether, whatever the extra efforts are for training, orientation, onboarding, sort of guiding through the processes of the organization. And so we support that program, and I'll show you what the eligibility criteria is and how you can apply. So for the employers, we are looking to work with and collaborate with Canadian-owned companies and whose primary activity is generation, transmission, or distribution of electricity, but also those organizations that support, including renewables, research and development, any energy efficiency, and manufacturing and servicing businesses that support that primary industry. So when you think about the organization would need to be in an electricity sector, but employees that you would hire, newcomers that we would subsidize, can be in any position within these organizations, right? So it doesn't mean they just have to be electrical engineers or apprentices and be in technical skills, but also for HR, administration, IT, marketing. So basically all functions that will support an organization. Okay, now we're getting to eligibility criteria for the employees. And newcomer, and this is created for newcomer and immigrants, and we'll talk about the differences in terminology and the categories in the next slide. Basically, people who arrived in the past 10 years. And in terms of their immigration status, we're talking about naturalized Canadian citizens. Somebody like me, I arrived to Canada in 96, and say by 2002, I became a Canadian citizen. Permanent residents, temporary foreign workers, persons who have been granted refugee status in Canada with open work permit, or graduate international students with a postgraduate work permit. And also, these employees would have to abide by local, federal, and provincial legislations for work. They're legally entitled to work according to the legislation and regulations, and they're not receiving EI at the time of their placement. So my email is at the end of this presentation. Any questions around the eligibility, any questions you have, feel free to send us an email and ask. And also, if you have further questions on the eligibility of the organization. Okay, so who are the immigrants coming to Canada? So we hear terms immigrant, newcomers, permanent resident, refugee claimants. So I just want to explain briefly these categories so that we have a better understanding in terms of their rights and freedoms, as well as responsibilities. So when we talk about immigrants, that's basically a person who was born somewhere else and they came to Canada. And I think for a while that the word immigrant had a bit of a kind of like politicized or derogatory content, but in a nutshell, everybody is an immigrant who was born somewhere else and came and started living in a different country. Now, the most common category of immigrants are permanent residents. So permanent residents, each one of these streams, international students, refugee claimants, temporary foreign workers, each one of these streams have multiple pathways on how people can immigrate, can come to Canada. So specifically for permanent residents, most common category are federally skilled workers and refugee claimants moving into the category of permanent residents. When a person is a permanent resident, they have all the rights, freedoms, and responsibilities like the Canadian citizens. The only thing is they can vote, and in some cases they cannot get secret clearance because maybe they have not lived in Canada long enough time. But I have seen some exemptions, right? So permanent residence is the most frequent category. They have all the rights to work, healthcare, education, just like Canadian born or naturalized citizens. International students. Now, this is a very interesting and very popular immigration category. Traditionally, international students comprised of those who wanted to come and study in Canada or do like a semester or two abroad, or take their full post-secondary education or their graduate studies and then go back to their countries. However, in my experience, I worked with program for internationally trained international students. Most of them, and by most, I mean in the high 90%, high 90% according to the project I worked on, as well as according to Canadian Bureau of International Education, most of them want to stay in Canada. So what happens is during their studies, they are able to work sometime 20 hours to 40 hours, but after they graduate, they are allowed to get postgraduate work permit, and that is when we can accept them in our Welcoming Newcomers program. So international students are very large part of those who move from international students to permanent residents. And in a lot of cases, this is not their first post-secondary degree. This is either their master's or their diploma, certification, specialized, or PhD. So they're adults, and usually they work throughout their studies, and they're often accompanied by their families. Refugee claimants are people who arrive to Canada because they fear persecution in their country of origin for one or the other reason. So when they arrive to Canada, and crossing the border is always legal, right? So it's not like, we often hear like, illegal immigrants. No, especially like in Canada, we like when you cross the border, Canadian like the Border and Services Agency, they process their crossing, they file the refugee claimants, they file their claim, and fortunately they're able to get their work permit right away. And it's a type of a work permit where they can do any job, right? It's called an open work permit. Open work permit is that it's not related to a specific employer, right? So refugee claimants are also, people that can be hired. They have their social insurance number, and they're perfectly fine and eligible to work in Canada. Temporary foreign workers are those who arrive, are exactly what the title says, are those who arrive to Canada for a determined amount of time, and sometimes their work permit is associated to a specific employer, and sometimes their work permit is open. So feel free that as an employer to ask people, what is your immigration status? And because you need that, have that conversation. It's fine. In most cases, like in 99% of the cases, all of these immigration categories have open work permit or are simply eligible to work as permanent residents and Canadian citizens. So if you're ever curious on where to find more information on which category of immigrants arrive to which province, if you'd like to dig deeper in data, there's a really cool website. It's that I put here on the slide. It's Open Canada, open data, and it's month-to-month information supplied by Immigration and Refugee IRCC Canada on what are the numbers of which category arriving to which province. I personally find that fascinating because I used to work in immigrant serving agencies, and Marie mentioned in employment services, language, and cross-cultural training. So I was always using that information to see who is coming in order to develop programming to respond to that need. So now we're going to talk about immigrant serving agencies. So when people arrive, so think about yourself. I don't know, if you were born in Canada, moving to Japan or moving to Finland or moving to Syria, like you can figure out most things. You can figure out kind of where to buy your groceries, how to get to work. but there's so many things that are not visible. So this is where we talk about, like, you know, tacit and explicit information. There's it feels like you're installing a new operating system. You know how to do your basic things. You seem like you know what you're doing, but the process of learning about cultural practices, work practices of a country. And for myself, I moved from Serbia to Canada to South Korea and then back to Canada. It feels like you're switching an operating system, like anything, how to express gratitude, how to accept compliment, how to accept feedback. So things like these it's a subject matter that is usually provided in information by immigrant serving agencies. So immigrant serving agencies are these organizations that are funded by federal and provincial government, and they have specific services to address the needs of immigrants to integrate well in the labor market and in the wider community. So we talk about recruiting, retaining, and finding immigrants, and try to keep them. Your best partners are immigrant serving agencies. Like, you never have to worry about because you may have a worker, somebody who recently arrived, and as a deemed Canadian, they may ask you, like, where do I get my health card? Where do I do this? There's none of that you have to do, but just refer them to immigrant serving agencies who are your allies, not just in attracting, but also kind of having immigrants may feel like at home, and in that kind of deliberate community building. So some of the typical programming that they offer is language training. So for some, that would be basic language training, but there's also enhanced language training that may be specific to the sector, maybe specific to the, going to post-secondary studies. But a lot of immigrant serving agencies also offer free courses, training on the job. Again, please feel free to contact me after this, because what we can do at EHRC, working with the newcomers program, we collaborate with many different immigrant serving agencies. So I can tell you which agency in your area can respond to your needs. Because, like, even if you Google immigrant serving agency, you may have like a lot of sponsored ads. So something that we can contribute to your working with newcomers is to connect you with your close or local immigrant serving agency, ISOs, I call them, ISOs that will help you. So language learning, orientation to local services and systems. This goes anything from, how do I read my kid's report card? Does it say they're good or bad? Because there's that sandwich. Sam is great. He has like a little bit of an issue in understanding, but overall it's good. So a lot of people ask me, is this good or bad? Like, I don't know. It's like a bit of a mixed signal, right? So anything from that situation to finding out how to interpret their bills, or how to sign up for different courses and all that stuff is done by immigrant serving agencies. They also provide job search training for the candidates, how to put together a resume, how to answer interview questions, how to network. And in that process, and also within the initiative for employers, which is another aspect, I firmly encourage you to partner with a local immigrant serving agency, because as a representative of your organization, you are able to volunteer or to engage with an immigrant serving agency and sort of present, like, talk about your organization. And I'm just going to go into the next slide. So what the things that they can help you with, they can pre-screen the candidates, right? I worked at a local agency called World Skills, where, I don't know, like Adecco would send us like 3 job postings. We pull out the clients from our database, and look at their resumes. So we do sort of like a pre-screening and send like 5 to 10 candidates from which you can choose. We were hosting employer events, whether they're networking, recruiting events. This doesn't even have to be on a big scale. This could be like a 1-hour virtual meeting. These are the types of jobs and types of skills we're looking for. If you or somebody you know have these, let us know. So a lot of the immigrant serving agency provide the cross-cultural communication sessions for both the newcomers as well as employers, post-recruitment support, if there's any issues, during the onboarding. So often, whether it's cross-cultural or personal, not everything is cultural. So sometimes, my brother and I grew up in the same place, but we are completely different people. So with any follow-up when it comes to newcomers, a lot of immigrant serving agency can support you with that. And facilitating of mentorship programs. So whether it's a formal or informal mentorship that you have in your organization, there's an opportunity to get involved with mentoring a newcomer. Okay, so right now I'll pass the presentation over to my co-facilitator, Richard Jenkins, who is the Director of Public Sector Research at Abacus Data. He has over 20 years of market research experience, and he was the lead researcher of the study. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about the study, and let me know when you'd like me to move to the next slide.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for the introduction. We did this study to support this report last year, and we basically did an online survey of 500 newcomers who've come to Canada within the past 10 years, who were all adults, and we did it to really establish and explore the experience of newcomers when it comes to working in Canada. We're very interested in their backgrounds and their training experience that they got before and after coming to Canada, their perception of the industry. What do they think about electricity and other sectors? And then what barriers do they face when it comes to employment? And I think that one of the first main findings was that impressions of electricity and renewable energy are really positive, that newcomers think very positively about these sectors. It's 60% positive for electricity, 63% positive for renewable energy. And this is really comparable to how financial services and healthcare are perceived. And so it's a kind of an industry that has a lot going for it when it comes to recruiting and thinking about getting newcomers into the workforce. Consequently, 36% of those surveyed said that they would definitely or probably consider working in the sector. So that's a big pool of potential people in the sector who are interested and have positive perceptions of it. If we go to the next slide, one of the things we wanted to do was understand what drives those positive perceptions of the industry. Because those are the kinds of things that, if you were trying to recruit someone, or you're talking about what the industry means in the community, you want to either try and counter things that people don't understand, or you want to reinforce because those are things they already kind of believe. And the top attributes are skilled work, meaningful work, respected by others, enjoyable work. So things that really speak to an exciting, fun place where skills really matter. Unfortunately, the thing that many believe, 58%, is that it's hard to get into. And so that kind of barrier is certainly evident. One of the things, it's not on this slide, but one of the things we explored was what newcomers are looking for in a job. And one of the things that newcomers are a little bit more focused on than, say, the average person looking for a job is they're a little bit more focused on the tangible benefits, salary, job security. That said, they still want, flexible work schedules, time off, work that aligns with their values. And as you can see from this chart, in many ways, that's true. That's their perception of what electricity offers. Meaningful work, skilled, respected. So it really hits those notes for people, even though the tangible benefits are really important for this community. And then the last slide, I think, one of the things we wanted to understand when we were looking at barriers and challenges was both the ones directly tied to the sector, but also some of the more broader ones related to just the challenges of getting a job in Canada in the face of trying to figure out how to get your kids to school and all of those other things and navigate the healthcare system and the education system. And when we asked about the electricity sector, this is kind of what we got, and only 22% either haven't already or don't expect to face barriers if they were trying to enter a career in the electricity sector. So there's certainly this sense among newcomers that even though their perceptions are quite positive, it aligns with their values in many ways, and many would consider working here. Lots see there being barriers, and the number one barrier for sure, mentioned by 45%, is the difficulty of getting credentials needed to work in the sector. Not knowing people who already work in the sector is definitely also the second most important thing. And it speaks to the role that we kind of know is true, is that people who are close to you and work in similar sectors that you want to get into can really make a big difference in terms of getting into the sector. Language skills is really only a quarter think their language skills are going to be a problem. But 20% think that racism or discrimination will be an issue. So wide range of issues, but a big part of it is that credential thing. And it's really interesting because when we looked at these newcomers, 68% who are working right now received training in a profession before they came to Canada. So more than 2/3 actually came to Canada with training that in a profession, but only 1/3 of these, but 1/3 of these are not working in the profession they trained in right now. So there is a bit of a gap there between the skills and training that people come to Canada with and the jobs they later get. And that's a gap that ideally we narrow and better take advantage of the human resource skills that those people have. But the survey was really interesting and covered all of these topics. This is just a little snapshot of the findings, and these findings get built on in the report that we're sharing today.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. Claire, in response to your question, the chat that West World Education Services can help with that. Absolutely. So as Richard mentions, these are the perception for newcomers. And having worked with a lot of people who have degree in engineering and were practicing engineers, by the time they got to Canada, they were project managers. So what happens is, in a lot of cases, not all, I've noticed that the way that newcomers are presenting themselves are, I'm an engineer. However, sometimes they did not work in the capacity of engineer of signing off on projects. I'll give you a very recent example. There's a young couple from Brazil, and I was talking to them, and somebody referred them to me. Oh, I have these two electrical engineers, and they're not able to find jobs. I'm like, okay. So I asked them to send me their resumes. So one of them, the wife has an engineering degree, and after that she got master's in business administration, and she worked in administrative as a project manager capacity. She never actually practiced, but very often newcomers define themselves by education and not so much by experience. And then the husband, he was working in the city, they're from Brazil, in a city in Brazil, like in a city transportation, in like organizing maintenance and, you know, like improving of the systems, and like just contact OC Transpo, which is Ottawa's like a local transportation, right? So the issue there is that they see themselves as engineers. They're not necessarily look at themselves of what kind of stuff did they do, you know, if they're construction engineers, if they work in building development, whether they're working in transportation, right? So part of what immigrant serving agencies do, and also whenever I'm advising somebody, is I kind of break down those skills and actually try to help them address the second biggest challenge, not knowing people who are already working in a sector, and find the right employers. So, you know, that's, you know, just that this is just an example or how like debunking these barriers can work in real life. And if people would like to go through the credential assessment, they would contact somebody like Wes or ICAS, which are organizations that actually deal with like a different transcripts and comparison between universities that, you know, in their countries and local, and they're then necessary to be a part of the package to be submitted for regulators in Ontario. That will be PNG, like a regulated body. So, you know, those are some of the examples of how, you know, we can work in and through the challenges of finding newcomers and newcomers finding the work. So this is where I will end our piece of sharing information, and I will ask if anybody has any questions. Oh, sorry, but I wanted to just give you my email address. Hang on. Okay, so the first 4 letters of my last name stand for Mr. DJ, because in Serbia consonants are highly valued. It's MRDJENOVIC@EHRC.ca. And also Austin will send this presentation deck to everybody, and it will also include my email address. Feel free to call me, feel free to contact me. I'm, you know, very passionate, very involved in work with newcomers. If you have any questions of how do I assess the language, there are specific tools. How do we, you know, how do we get in contact with immigrant serving agencies? We're happy to do and happy to support the employers in electricity sector and the job seekers.
I'll kick it off, Dragana and Richard. Thank you so much for the information today. It looks like we have a little bit of work to do, and maybe even to promote our job board a little bit better as well, because I thought it was fascinating that 36% did not know people who are already working in the sector. So I'm going to, I mean, you've given some great advice on where immigrants can go to these different immigration services agencies and speak to somebody about that. As an employer in our sector, where would they find the immigrants with specific skills that they're looking for?
Mm-hmm. So there's traditional ways that people recruit, and those may not always be the best ways, whether it's LinkedIn or Indeed. I would contact, like I mentioned, immigrant serving agencies, but also education institutions. Like there's a lot of newcomers who do go to, you know, either additional or starting education piece, even though they have education and experience from their home countries. Another place to go is I would reach out also to professional engineering groups or Red Seal organizations, you know, because often, so what happens is when local engineers arrive to, like locally trained and educated engineers arrive to Professional Engineers Association of Ontario, they are just out of schools. However, for newcomers, they may have already previous work experience on top of their education, and they're just going through the credential systems.
Okay, thank you. There's another question or a comment actually from Claire. Bruce Power
Yes.
has been, okay, perfect. So you did see
Access
that.
Employment, exactly. Access Employment is definitely one of our one of the organizations that I would always recommend to work with. And they are specifically just employment newcomers, and they work with a large number of partners. So highly recommended, Access Employment. Thank you, Claire.
Perfect. So I just had another question as well. This was given to me earlier, actually. So as you know, in our industry, it's very highly safety focused. So how do we know if the language skills are high enough for that safety standard of work and to be able to communicate that with others?
Yes, this is a very, very important notion when hiring somebody, when you're uncertain whether they understand safety, if not, maybe like number 1 or 2. So there is an organization called Canadian Center for Language Benchmarks, where they have benchmarked different occupations. So if you think about language learning as in listening, reading, writing, and speaking, and going from level 0 to level 10, right? So they have a lot of occupations that are benchmarked at like, in what position would you have to have this level of CLB, is a Canadian language benchmarks. And 95% of immigrants would have to take it's a test that tells you where your language is, and then you're able to learn. So there is a tangible assessment tool, as well as one developed for training on where your employees need to be in order to do the work safely. And again, for more information on this and where those benchmarks are, please feel free to contact me.
Great, thank you. Let's see if there's any other questions. And there is another question online. Okay, so I will read out the question. It's, I was wondering what was the reason of this research, maybe because employers in this sector have a hard time finding candidates, or what? Also curious if they're going to have any recruitment events for this sector in the future, and how EHRC is promoting these type of events.
Richard?
Well, I can tackle a little bit of the first one, I think.
Sure.
You know, one of the things that has been true for energy sector, but also others, is that there is more jobs than there are people to do those jobs, and more we need to start thinking about where that talent pool is. And one of the reasons to do this study was to really explore to what extent newcomers, what their perceptions and attitudes could help understand and develop programs that would make them more the sector more successful at getting them into jobs and have them be successful once they're in those jobs. And so it's kind of really motivated from that premise. The job market these days is very competitive, and electricity is competing with not only other countries, but other sectors who are also facing shortages. And this was a real attempt to understand this community of people who are so important and have a lot of skills, and see to what extent what we can do to help get them into the sector a little bit better. I think that's
perfect.
Thank you.
And I see some similarities, not only with immigrants, but youth as well. I noticed that, you know, the perception is good, but I feel that awareness, it's always awareness that tends to be the challenge for those type of groups. So I wanted to just address the second piece. Absolutely, if we are going to be doing a future event on this, we will definitely be promoting that future event, whether it's through our newsletter or on our website, which you can access at ehrc.ca. So we'll just wait and see if there's any other questions. If there isn't, I'll just wrap it up shortly.
So
Okay.
as we're working with employers, sorry, I just wanted to add, as we're working with employers across Canada, we are looking more towards, partnering further in with immigrant serving agencies, because we are working with different diversity, equity, and inclusion groups to organize maybe like a regional job fair, or if it's virtual, maybe have like across the country. Yeah, we'll definitely be working on upcoming events where we bring together the job seekers and the employers together.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so another question did pop up. Do you know if employers are open to pre-arrival?
I think more and more so, yes, because I have started getting questions on international recruitment. So those through temporary foreign workers, through international mobility, or through temporary foreign workers, like through those two streams. So most definitely, so it's just a question of liaising, again, employers with immigrant serving agencies, which I know Andrea is. Andrea and I used to work together at World Skills. It's just a matter of connecting employers with immigrant serving agencies who have this pre-arrival programs. Yeah,
okay, great.
The answer is like, yes, more so now than ever before, in the light of labor shortages, yes.
Interesting. Okay, so that's great. Thank you. So I think we'll wrap it up now. First of all, I want to thank everyone for participating in our webinar today, and our presenters, Dragana and Richard. Thank you so much. This webinar will be posted on the EHRC website and YouTube channel. And if you do want to stay informed on future webinars and any of our other resources, you can sign up for our newsletter on the electricityhr.ca website. So you simply just scroll down to the bottom of every page, and there is a way for you to sign up. So I hope that you enjoyed today's session, and until next time, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.